Hey everyone, welcome back. Look, if you're a focused learner looking to cut through the noise and get straight to the facts, you are in the exact right place. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating and honestly incredibly relevant piece of research. It's a master's thesis from Leiden University by Fouke Desenek titled The Politics of Water Scarcity, an Analysis of the Israeli-Jordanian Hydropolitical Relationship. Now, we hear about water crises in the Middle East all the time in the news, right? But the academic reality is vastly more complex, and I'd argue way more interesting than those flashy headlines suggest. Okay, let's dive into this. Picture this. It's 1995, and Ismail Serageldin, who was the vice president of the World Bank at the time, issues this incredibly dramatic warning. He said, if the wars of the century were fought over oil, the wars of the next century will be fought over water. It's a heavy statement, isn't it? And for decades now, international institutions, politicians, and the media have really pushed this sensationalized water wars narrative. The idea is simple but terrifying. As water dries up, nations are inevitably going to take up arms against each other just to survive. It's been used as the go-to explanation for regional instability, civil wars, and geopolitical tension.
But is it actually true? I mean, when we set aside the political rhetoric and look strictly at the historical data and the rigorous academic research, does water scarcity truly cause wars? That is the core journey we're taking in today's explainer. We're going to debunk public hyperbole with actual academic reality, focusing on one of the absolute most water-stressed regions on the planet.
To really grasp the scale of the physical challenge here, we need to look at the numbers. And this one is staggering. 11. The Middle East and North Africa account for 11 of the 17 most water-stressed countries in the entire world. And this isn't some distant future projection, it is a current, undeniable physical reality. Before we can even begin to analyze the politics, we have to anchor our understanding in the fact that this region is under extreme, palpable environmental pressure. So, the crucial point is, this scarcity isn't born from a single issue. It's a perfect storm of environmental and human factors colliding. I mean, the region is literally 85% desert. Combine that highly arid environment with rapid population growth, the escalating, undeniable impacts of climate change, and, arguably most importantly, inefficient water management. Plus, to make things even more complicated, over 66% of the region's freshwater resources are transboundary, meaning they physically flow right across the borders of multiple countries. When you look at all of that, it's easy to see why observers without a nuanced perspective might immediately jump to the conclusion that conflict is inevitable.
Part 1. The Water Wars. Myth and Unpacking Environmental Security Theory. For a really long time, traditional scholars studying hydropolitics essentially mirrored the media's alarmism. They looked at water scarcity primarily as a direct trigger for violent interstate warfare. They treated a nation's water supply exactly the same way they treated its borders or its military, as a hard, traditional national security issue. This quote right here from researchers Bullock and Darwish perfectly captures that old-school mindset. It treats water as a strict zero-sum game. If one country gets a drop more, another country inherently gets a drop less, which leads straight to domination. But modern critical scholars point out that this view is often heavily colored by what the source text describes as an imperial oriental imagination. Basically, it's a biased assumption that the region is inherently hostile, fragile, and simply incapable of managing its own resources through peaceful diplomacy.
So we essentially have two contrasting ways of thinking about this. On the one hand, the traditionalists expect severe water scarcity to trigger violent conflicts and wars between states. On the other hand, we have critical hydropolitics, which is the lens our source thesis uses. This approach urges us to shift our mindset away from that constant doomsaying. It argues that looking at water as a simple binary of conflict versus cooperation is just way too basic. Instead, we have to move beyond that dichotomy to study the complex, sometimes messy, nuanced interactions that actually happen when countries are forced to share a vital, dwindling resource.
And here's the fact that absolutely shatters that traditionalist view. According to leading researcher Aaron T. Wolfe, the historical data simply does not support the water war hypothesis at all. In fact, researchers found only 7 minor water-related disputes along international waterways in the entire 20th century. Think about that. When faced with severe water scarcity, nations overwhelmingly choose to negotiate. They sign treaties and they build infrastructure together. They do not go to war.
Part 2. The Israel-Jordan Relationship, a fascinating case study in water cooperation.
Let's move to and see how this builds by looking at the core case study of the thesis, the remarkably unique hydropolitical relationship between Israel and Jordan.
Despite broader regional tensions and deep historical animosity, these two have actually yielded highly functional cooperation over water. Looking at the timeline, pre-1994, sure, there were historical tensions and shared resource disputes, but in 1994 they signed the Israeli-Jordanian Treaty of Peace, which extensively covered how they would share transboundary water. Fast forward past the domestic pressures of the 2011 Arab uprisings, all the way up to 2021, where they signed a truly unprecedented declaration of intent. Over decades, these two nations have consistently, repeatedly chosen diplomacy over warfare when it comes to their shared rivers.
That 2021 Declaration of Intent is a textbook example of what scholars call technical environmental cooperation. It was mediated under the auspices of the UAE and the US, and it's essentially a massive water-for-energy swap. Jordan provides solar energy to Israel, and in return, Israel provides desalinated water to Jordan. On paper, it looks like a perfect, peaceful, win-win synergy. But remember, we are looking through the lens of critical hydropolitics today, which means we have to dig a little deeper than just what's on paper.
Part 3. Power and hydrohegemony, the hidden dynamics of cooperation.
Okay, so we've established that there aren't any water wars. There's cooperation. Awesome, right? Well, just because states are cooperating over water doesn't automatically mean the relationship is equal, equitable, or even entirely peaceful. To understand why, you really need to understand this concept of hydrohegemony. Hydrohegemony is the dominance of one state over transboundary water resources, which leads to an asymmetric or totally unbalanced hydropolitical relationship and ultimately unequal outcomes. It means that even when a treaty gets signed and everyone shakes hands, the more powerful state is the one dictating the terms. The cooperation happens? Absolutely, but the outcomes are structurally unequal. According to the research presented in the thesis, in this specific interstate relationship, Israel is identified as the hydrohegemon. Because of its geographic position, its massive technological advancements in desalination, and its broader geopolitical standing, Israel naturally holds the dominant position. This creates an inherently asymmetric relationship with Jordan, and it fundamentally shapes every single negotiation, every treaty, and every technical exchange between the two countries. And this brilliantly illustrates the author's two main hypotheses. First, the thesis argues that because of this hegemonic power imbalance, the relationship is actually characterized a lot more by domination than by genuine equal cooperation. The terms of those water-for-energy deals heavily favor the hegemon. Second, and this is crucial, we cannot automatically view water cooperation as some magical avenue toward broader regional peace. Working together in one sector doesn't suddenly erase the underlying, deeply entrenched power dynamics. Furthermore, the author points out how politicians use what is called discursive power, which is essentially the power of political spin and rhetoric. The research notes that decision-makers in the region often use the language of water scarcity purely for their own political survival. By pointing fingers at external factors, like, say, blaming refugees as the sole cause of water stress, politicians can cleverly divert attention away from their own domestic failures in water management. This kind of rhetoric makes the situation feel like a zero-sum conflict to the public, which in turn actually reinforces the unbalanced asymmetrical relationship between the states. It makes the conflict highly intractable. If there's one summary takeaway you should remember from this entire explainer, let it be this: cooperation does not guarantee equity. The real threat in the Middle East isn't the dramatic Hollywood-style water wars that we've been warned about since the 90s. The real, day-to-day issue is the quiet, unequal dynamics of hydrohegemony that are so often masked as cooperative, friendly treaties. Which leaves us with a pretty vital question to consider. As climate change accelerates and these vital resources become even tighter, we are going to see a lot more of these treaties being signed around the world. So the next time you see a major climate or water treaty announced in the news, look past the sensational headlines. Ask yourself, are these future environmental agreements actually being built on true equity? Or are they simply reinforcing the asymmetrical power of the strongest player? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions, and I'll see you next time.